2. When we finished dinner, Troy had a car come pick me up and take me back to our apartment. The car was driven by one of the handful of illegal immigrants he had working for him, whose sole jobs were just driving him around. Troy somehow found enjoyment in letting people know that he didn't have to drive himself. He had enough money to hire multiple chauffeurs, always referring to each of them as one of my guys. In reality, he was probably paying them very little, and if they asked for a raise, he'd make sure they were deported. As one of Troy's my guys drove me back home, I began wondering how I was going to talk my way out of this situation. "Did you have a nice evening, miss?" the my guy asked. "Hmm?" I asked. "Yes, fine." Sometimes I wondered whether they were also taking notes and telling Troy how I was acting. Troy thought I didn't want to go back to Reindeer Falls because it was a boring town and I would rather be somewhere exciting and warm, but the reality was that I had memories there that I wanted to stay buried and relatives whom I had not spoken to in years and had no desire to reach out to. But I knew I had no choice. If I didn't do what Troy said, he would fire me and kick me out of the apartment. I would be unemployed just days before Christmas, which was a disaster. I imagined myself filming a blog where I explained how I was broke and homeless. I pictured myself crying on camera and begging lonely men for money. No, I couldn't stoop to that level. As bad as Reindeer Falls was, this would be worse. And the funniest part of all of this was that even if Troy evicted me, I wouldn't be homeless because I did have a house. And of course it was in Reindeer Falls, so it looked like I was headed there regardless of what I decided. When I arrived at the apartment, I thanked the my guy for doing his job and took the elevator to the 24th floor. And when I entered the apartment, I knew I would be alone for a few hours. Troy had decided to go out drinking with friends, so he wouldn't be back until the early hours of the morning. But I couldn't just relax. I knew he would want me to be working. He probably wanted me to head out to Reindeer Falls tomorrow, so I needed to know for sure that I had a place to stay before making the 3-hour trip out into the middle of nowhere. If anything had happened to the house, then I would be forced to beg either my mom or my sister to let me stay with them, and I knew which of them would be worse. I sat down on the couch and tried to find a position that wasn't too uncomfortable. The couch was hard, as though it was meant more for display rather than for actually sitting on. In fact, everything in this apartment looked like it was only for display. It all looked like it was ripped right from a catalog, carefully selected and positioned to look good. I scrolled through my phone and found my sister's number, or at least the number that had been hers the last time we had spoken. It had been in September, not this year but the year before, when I had texted her happy birthday. She hadn't responded, and she hadn't reached out on my own birthday, which had been just a week later. I took a deep breath and called. The phone rang a few times and then stopped. Jess didn't say anything, but I could faintly hear her breathing on the other end. "Hello," I finally said after waiting for her to say something. "I'm here," she said. "How are you?" I asked. There was a long pause, as though she was wondering whether to actually answer this question or to chastise me for something I had said or done the last time we had spoken. "I'm fine," Jess answered finally. "What do you need?" "What do I need?" I repeated. "Yes, what do you need?" she asked. "You're not calling just to ask me how I'm doing, so what do you need?" I was at a loss. We both had reasons to be angry at each other, and we could probably spend hours arguing over what was whose fault, but I was saddened that she thought I would only reach out because I needed something. "I'm coming to Reindeer Falls for Christmas," I said. There was a loud clang as she must have dropped something she'd been holding in her other hand. "You're what?" "I'm coming back I caught myself at the last second. I'd almost said home, and I didn't want to attach any sentimental value to that place. "I don't need anything. I just figured I'd check with you to see if the house is still standing in one piece and the locks are still the same." "The locks are the same," Jess said. "The house looks all right from the outside. Inside, I have no idea. I haven't set foot in there in a while." Her tone shifted just a little. She seemed relieved that I wasn't asking her if I could stay with her family, but there was this awkwardness whenever we talked about the house our father had left us. I didn't know how I was supposed to feel about it, and she likely didn't know either, but neither of us wanted to ask the other how they felt. "How's your kid?" I asked. "Kids," Jess said. "There's 2 of them now, and they're fine." I felt a flip in my stomach. It was saddening realizing that my own relatives had lives that I knew nothing about. I was almost embarrassed that I hadn't known a second child existed, but I exhaled slowly and told myself that Jess had made no effort to tell me about the child either. The only reason I knew was because I had to ask right now. "Listen, I get it if you don't want to see me at all while I'm there," I began, "but it would be nice to—" "Why are you coming back here?" she interrupted. I hesitated. The answer to the question was work, but Jess had always had a poor opinion of my job, and I didn't feel like having that argument right now. "Just need a change of scenery, I guess," I said. "Oh yes, I imagine it'll be nice to go somewhere that's not Paris or Rome or Tokyo or wherever you're off to next," Jess said bitterly. She had listed those off casually as if she were just naming whatever city came to mind, but I had actually been to all 3 of those in the last year, so I knew she was keeping track of what I was doing. Almost as if she cared. Or was jealous. But I didn't want to mention that. "How's Mom?" I asked. Jess scoffed. "Might as well ask you the same question." "Well, at least our dislike of our mother gave us one thing in common." I'll have to see her, I said with a sigh. You don't have to, Jess said. No, I should. I can't go back there and not see her at all. And I can't hide while I'm there. I take one trip to a convenience store and someone will recognize me and gossip will spread around town. Eventually she'll hear about it. The people here have better things to do than talk about you, Jess said. No, they don't, I replied. That wasn't me being arrogant. Nothing ever happened in Reindeer Falls. Someone from out of town coming to visit would be the most exciting event of the year. So is this a vacation, or are you working? Jess asked, slightly slurring the word working to let me know what she thought of it. Working, I said. Well, good luck. I don't know how you're going to make our town sound interesting, especially compared to the places you usually go. That was the second time she had mentioned that. I could tell she was jealous that I wasn't trapped in the same town my whole life, but that wasn't my fault. I'll think of something, I said. Jess sighed. Look, I'm willing to be nice and get along for a few days, put aside whatever arguments we've had, but I need you to promise me something, she said. Oh? I was wary about what this request might be. What is it? When you start filming our town and telling people about it, I mean, no one's ever heard of Reindeer Falls. You'll be bringing a lot of attention to it. So please, whatever you do, don't mention stripping Santa. I felt as though someone had punched my stomach from the inside. I hadn't thought of stripping Santa in so long, like a repressed childhood memory that I had convinced myself wasn't real. Is that still a thing? I asked. Jess laughed dryly. So long as old women exist to screech about tradition, it will always be here. Every year. It's apparently not the spectacle it once was. I never attend, obviously. I thought that might be a lie. I figured Jess may have gone to stripping Santa once, but I didn't want to argue about that either. But I've seen some of the more recent Santas, and well, when your town's job market crashes and half your generation moves away, the choices for Santa get a bit more desperate. I almost felt nauseous. At what age did you first realize that it was really weird? I asked. Because, when you're a child, you don't think about stuff like that. You just nod your head and assume it's normal. You think every town has this. Well, that must have been a rude awakening for you, Jess said, when you moved to a big city and realized they didn't have this there. But like I said, please don't mention it. I'm sure you can imagine the types of people that would try to visit our town and see it for themselves. I shuddered at the thought. I imagined swarms of people flowing through the streets of my hometown, desperate to see stripping Santa, or worse, participate. I won't mention it, I said. I'll instead give a tearful testimony about what it's like going back to where you grew up and seeing how it's all changed, and how I think about the time I have left in this world and making the most of it. Just hearing you say that makes me want to throw up, and I'm sure you'll do a great job, Jess said. I ended the call and instinctively felt like getting a drink. That was a bad sign. I'd been trying to teach myself not to immediately seek that option out, but like a reflex it came to me. I needed something to calm me down. Just the thought of going back to that town made my heart start pounding. But then there was the house that our father had left us. I hadn't set foot in it since I was a child. All I had was vague flashes in my mind of what each room looked like, and even then they probably looked completely different now, all decayed, the roof leaking, the paint on the walls peeling. Or maybe it was fine. I had no idea how much effort he had put into maintaining the house over the years. I hadn't even known he still had it until I found out about his will. And then there was stripping Santa. Something I'd actively blocked out of my memory and convinced myself wasn't real. It couldn't be real. It was such a ludicrous tradition that no sane adult would be able to come up with. It had to be the product of our collective childhood imaginations. We must have just made it up. We probably all sat around at night trying to think of the most messed up thing that we could come up with. Yes, that's what it had been. But no, hearing Jess say the words out loud reminded me that stripping Santa was real. And it would be happening soon. Maybe I shouldn't go. Maybe I should wait until after Christmas was over, and then I could pretend it wasn't happening. I could talk about my hometown and not address the giant elephant in the room. But I knew Troy wanted me to be there for Christmas. All part of the narrative of me going home and seeing my family. I walked over to the tall cabinet in the far corner of the living room and opened it, staring at all of the unopened bottles. There was a method to Troy's madness. All of the alcohol was either French or Italian, but they always needed to have names that were very long, which he would quickly recite when presenting them to people he wanted to impress, so they would think that he spoke multiple languages. He did not. There were also a few bottles where the labels were written in Bulgarian. He had specifically chosen that because someone might look at the letters and assume it was Russian, and he would be able to correct them, thus further showing how cultured he was. I looked at all of the bottles and tried to think of which one he would be the least angry at me for opening. He always told me that this was our apartment, filled with our stuff, until I did something like this, and suddenly everything belonged to him. Finally, I grabbed one of the Italian bottles that was the closest in color to water so that I could fill it up with water later and hope he didn't notice that the cap came off surprisingly easily when he finally decided to try it. I grabbed the bottle, walked over to the kitchen, and opened the cabinet with all of our mugs. I'd learned this trick long ago. Whenever Troy saw me with an empty glass, he would immediately ask if I'd been drinking again, but if I had a mug, the thought never crossed his mind. So I grabbed the mug that read World's Best Boss, a mug that he had bought himself, and filled it up. The anxiety I was having over visiting Reindeer Falls wasn't the only reason I needed a drink right now. I knew that once I was there, I would probably not get any opportunities to drink at all. I doubted there was any alcohol in the house, and if by some reason Jess decided to invite me over to her house, I remembered that her husband was one of those people who not only never drank, but also looked down at those who did. And if I decided to go to the store and stock up, the locals would whisper that the new person in town was an addict. So it had to be now. I walked out onto our balcony, the cold winter air immediately smacking me in the face. It was dark out, and the city below us was a blanket of small specks of light, some moving around, some frozen in place. For as much as I disliked living with Troy, the view from here was nice. I suppose I shouldn't complain. That's something he had suggested once. He had shown me one of my videos and pointed out that I looked depressed, and read out a handful of comments of people asking me why I was so sad, as well as a few that told me I had nothing to be sad about. They said that I didn't get to be depressed if I got to see the world instead of having a day job. That was the first time Troy had tied me to a chair. He had asked me if I wanted him to give me a reason to be upset. I drank half of the mug in one gulp. The fire now burning in my throat was a stark opposite to the cold wind blowing across my face. I heard the sound of tires screeching on the street below and looked down. I wondered what would happen if I jumped. If I did it when Troy came home, would people think it was him? I imagined my body splattered across the sidewalk below, a giant red puddle, and then one piece of my face still intact, the piece that contained the now yellowing bruise he had given me. I almost laughed at what a stupid sight that was. Troy would likely never face consequences for it. He'd probably tell them to scoop up my blood and see how much alcohol was in it, but just knowing how many inconveniences this would cause him made me happy. And his image, that would be destroyed forever. There was another sharp gust of wind, and I decided to go back inside. I sat down on the couch to finish my drink, and I stared at the leopard pattern on the fabric. I gazed at the yellow and black spots, trying not to think about whether the animal had still been alive when they skinned it, and wondered what would happen if I threw up all over the couch. The colors would blend in together perfectly. You wouldn't even notice it if it weren't for the smell. I stared deeper and deeper into the couch pattern, and next thing I knew I was woken up by the sound of a snap. My eyes burst open, and I slowly focused in on what was in front of me. Troy's fingers were hovering right before my face. "Good, you're awake," he said. I squinted as I tried to figure out where I was. A beam of light was coming through the large window near me. The sun was rising. I had to have fallen asleep on the couch. Suddenly my eyes shot open again as I realized I had passed out while drinking. And here, on the couch, he would know, he would figure it out. "Going to have to make yourself a stronger coffee next time, one that keeps you awake," he said. That's when I noticed he was lifting a mug off the floor. World's Best Boss. I remember that I had poured my drink into it. "Did you sleep well?" he asked as he walked back to the kitchen with the mug. "Not really," I mumbled as I sat up and felt my back cry out. "It's okay, you can sleep in the car," he said. "What car?" I asked. "You're going to Reindeer Falls tonight," he yelled from the kitchen. "I'm having one of my guys drive you." "No!" I said, a little louder than I should have. I tried to stand up, but I still felt knots in my spine. As I had guessed, the unusually hard couch wasn't made for sitting, much less for sleeping. "There's supposed to be a blizzard tonight," Troy said, reappearing in the doorway. "If you don't go tonight, you'll have to wait a few days." "No, I meant," I said, and paused, realizing how dry my mouth was. "You don't need your guy driving, I'll drive myself." Troy frowned. I didn't usually make requests like this. He opened his mouth, but I was quick to explain. "If the whole point of this is to make me seem relatable, how will it look when I have the company escort me there? It'll just remind people that I'm more successful than them." I didn't mention the real reason, which was that if Troy had one of his guys drop me off, then I would be stuck in Reindeer Falls for as long as he wanted me to. Maybe forever. "See, I like this," he said with a faint smile. "I like when you think ahead. Now, the other thing we need to figure out is where you'll be staying." "Already figured that out last night?" I said unsuredly. "It's morning, right?" I asked, straining my neck to see the clock on the stove. "I see you were busy while I was gone," Troy nodded approvingly. "You convinced your family to let you stay, or did you get a hotel?" "No, I'm going to stay at my dad's house," I said. Troy frowned and looked confused. "I thought your dad was dead," he recalled. "He is," I said quietly, "but he left his house for me and my sister." Troy's eyebrows shot up. "I'm sorry, you've never mentioned this before." "Have you?" he asked. "No, because I hadn't felt like talking about it," I said, and I still didn't, but I could tell when Troy was excited about something. He sat down beside me on the couch. "You've had your own house this whole time and you never bothered telling me?" he asked. His tone was almost convincing. He sounded like he was concerned that I would keep secrets from him, rather than annoyed that a house presented opportunities that we had not taken advantage of. I said I didn't want to talk about it, I snapped, shifting further away from him on the couch. "You never want to talk about anything from your childhood," Troy said quietly, almost sounding hurt. "What do you want to know?" I asked. My parents got divorced when I was 5, both of them refusing to explain why. My mom got to keep custody, and our dad just fell off the face of the earth. We never heard from him again. And then, like 15 years later, I found out he's dead. They found him in his bathtub. No note, nothing. And then we find out he left us the house we had first lived in. And I don't know if that was him trying to apologize or whatever, but I had enough reasons to never want to go back there. And now on top of that, I have this house with these unanswered questions hovering over my... I stopped mid-sentence as Troy hugged me. I hated that my first thought was not to cry because he might hit me again. He squeezed tightly, but I knew he was being manipulative. He wanted me to calm down. Do you know what state the house is in? He asked. Is it safe? I shrugged. My sister said that at least from the outside it looks fine. She hasn't been inside in a while either. Troy frowned. Is this going to be a problem? You can't stay there if it's unsafe. I raised my hands in exasperation. Then I'll have to find a motel, I guess. He scratched his head as he thought. I mean, we don't want it to be too nice, he pondered. Like if it needs a few fixes, that would make it appear cute. Or if there were imperfections, but they were only aesthetic, nothing that was actually dangerous or needed renovating. You know, this could be good for tourism in your town. I scoffed. People aren't going to want to visit Reindeer Falls just because I once lived there. Unless they were stalkers. Visit? No, Troy explained. But a house like that in a picturesque small town, we could get a lot renting it out. We? I asked, raising an eyebrow. So that's why he was excited to hear about the house. He already saw this as an investment opportunity. Yeah, he said. You obviously need help with the accounting side of things, he added hurriedly, when he realized he might have made a mistake in saying we. Don't get ahead of yourself, I said calmly. We have no idea what state the inside is in. There could be so many repairs that you would need to ask your dad for help, I added, knowing that would bother him. Plus, I technically only own half of the house. You'd need Jess to agree to renting it out. Well, that'll be your job, he said. Troy stood up. This is exciting, he said. Anyway, let's get you packed and ready to go. I got up off the couch, but suddenly Troy lifted a finger. Actually, hold on, he said. One more thing. What? I asked. He narrowed his eyes. I could see he was curious about something. What's stripping Santa? He asked. I felt my throat clog up. I must have misheard him. How could he know about that? What's what? I asked. Stripping Santa, he repeated. What is it? Did I say it in my sleep? Did Jess call and tell him? No, that didn't make sense. Maybe he looked up Reindeer Falls online and heard about it. But no, I'd looked once myself. There was nothing online about Reindeer Falls. Why are you panicking? Troy asked, smiling lightly. Answer the question. No, I couldn't tell him. Then he would force me to shine a spotlight on it, which was the one thing Jess had asked me not to do. Melody, he said slightly louder. Were you listening in on my calls? I asked, suddenly piecing it together. That was the only way he could have known. I had repressed any memory of stripping Santa. I hadn't thought about it in years. And then Troy suddenly asked me about it just hours after Jess reminded me over the phone that it existed. Yes, Troy said, as if this was perfectly reasonable. What? Why? I asked incredulously. You can't do that. Of course I can, Troy said. It's in your contract. If you use a company phone, the company has the right to monitor any activities. A company phone? I repeated. Yes, I bought you that phone. I pay the bills. It's a company phone, Troy said, slowly beginning to sound impatient. Now answer my question. What is stripping Santa? I began blinking rapidly. I needed to find a way to make this sound less insane than it really was. It's nothing. It's like a stupid tradition in Reindeer Falls, kind of like an inside joke. I'd completely forgotten about it for years. It's nothing. Didn't sound like nothing the way Jess described it, Troy said. Sounded like something. Why do you want to know? I asked. Because maybe it's a harmless secret, Troy explained, but your sister sounded very worried about people finding out about it. If this is something illegal, then I need to protect the company's image. I struggled not to roll my eyes. It's not illegal, I said. Then you should have no problem telling me what it is, Troy replied. I paused. There wasn't any way out of this unless I invented a lie on the spot. Stop stalling and tell me, he said. What are you afraid I'm going to do? I'm afraid that you're going to see this as an even bigger opportunity than the house I just told you I had. Stripping Santa, I said with a sigh. It's this weird tradition in Reindeer Falls. I don't know when it started or who started it. I didn't even really know what it was as a kid. They just tell you it's a party, and then as you get older, you start hearing rumors from other kids. And then when you're an adult, you find out that the rumors are true. So what is it? Troy asked again. Basically, a bunch of women in the town get together before Christmas at an undisclosed location, and they have a giant party, I said, trying not to cringe as the words came out of my mouth. It's all the women and one man who was chosen by the town to dress as Santa, and all of the women basically get to have their way with him. Like a giant Christmas-themed sex party with a stripper dressed as Santa Claus. Troy stared at me with a blank expression for what felt like an hour. Okay, now tell me the truth. What is it actually? He asked finally. No, that was good, he said. I'm impressed that you could come up with that on the spot, but now I need to know the truth. No, that is the truth, I said. Troy frowned. He furrowed his brow as though this was the hardest thing he had ever had to figure out, and then without warning he burst out laughing. I didn't know what to do. I'd never told someone who wasn't from Reindeer Falls what stripping Santa was, and now I realized why. Troy was already back on the couch, having collapsed as he clutched his stomach. I didn't say anything. I just waited for him to let it out of his system. Then I had the thought of using this to scare him. Would he really let me go to Reindeer Falls if he was worried I would attend this kind of party? Wow, Troy said, finally sitting up straight. Do you want to hear my town's tradition? It's way more boring. I'm glad you find this funny, I said with a frown, because the reality is that stripping Santa has caused a lot of problems in my town. What do you mean? He asked, tilting his head. This has ruined more marriages than you can imagine. It's not just the single women who go to stripping Santa. In fact, the majority who go are married. And a lot of them are old, much older than whoever is chosen to be Santa, who I'm sure you can imagine always has to be young and in peak physical condition. Troy looked confused. You're saying all the married women get together and collectively cheat on their husbands? He asked in a tone that suggested he still wasn't sure I wasn't just making all of this up. Yes, I said. And the husbands just stand by and let this happen? He asked, completely stunned. They're not bothered by it? Of course they're bothered, I explained. But if they complain, they're just told it's tradition. We can't break tradition. We've always had stripping Santa, and Christmas would be incomplete without it. That's how the old saying went. Half the husbands in Reindeer Falls divorced their wives, and the other half forgave them. That's not to say only the women are at fault here. I'm sure you can imagine there are plenty of happily married men who would love to volunteer to be stripping Santa and get shared by 40, 50 women at the same time. Troy's eyes widened as I told him this. Okay, swear to God you're not making any of this up, he said. Swear to God, I said. Every year that I was there, we had stripping Santa, and based on what Jess said, it hasn't stopped. Wow, Troy said quietly. Did you ever attend it? He asked, trying not to sound suspicious. No, I said. It's disgusting. Besides, by the time I became an adult and would have been allowed to attend, I was already looking for ways to get out of that town and never come back. Troy looked down. I could see he was deep in thought. And I'm not going to attend it now, I said as I realized what he was probably thinking. You can fire me if you want. I'm not taking part in it. Oh, I wouldn't want you to, he said. You're a lady, not like those wild women out in the countryside. How he managed to say that sentence with a straight face was a mystery. But you are going to figure out anything you can about it, he said. The focus of your content should still be visiting your beautiful hometown and repairing your relationships with your family, but stripping Santa will be an added mystery for you to resolve. We can hype all of this up. Who is Santa? Who is attending? Who's being cheated on? This is a gold mine. He stood up and began pacing. When people find out about stripping Santa, they will want to take part. People will flock to your town. And then if we rent out the house, just imagine, we could fit in like a dozen college girls each winter who want to participate in stripping Santa. Troy immediately walked over to the alcohol cabinet and opened it. I'm not writing about stripping Santa, I said. He turned around. Yes, you are, he said. We want your content to be relatable, and it will be, but now it's something else as well. It's unique. No one else has something like stripping Santa. I'm not going to make a mockery of my hometown, I told him. Troy tilted his head and chuckled. He turned around and pulled out one of the Bulgarian bottles, as well as one glass from a side shelf. You think a secret like stripping Santa stays a secret forever? In today's day and age? No. One day the world will know about stripping Santa, and your town will get turned into a tourist attraction. The question is, do you want to be the one who breaks the story and make a lot of money off of it, or do you want to watch someone else do it instead? He opened the bottle and poured into the glass. So, he said, raising it eventually, to stripping Santa. And he drank the whole glass. Where's mine? I asked, even though I didn't feel like drinking for once. None for you, he said. You have a long drive ahead of you.